it all starts like all trips do, full of bravadery in the pub. Alcohol is a factor, and a trip was born. As I'm now working class still, it was difficult for me to join in for the 5-week adventure. So I offered to parachute myself into the middle of Europe somewhere and hopefully join the fun for a week. So a huge shout out to British Airways, Loganair et al., who got me there into Venice, where I was able to pick up a hire motorcycle and join the fun.
And while Steve was just joining in the fun, Mike and I were, by this stage, 6 days into the tour, having started in Rotterdam and made our way down to the Austro-Italian border, ready to jump on our bikes and meet up with Steve. If you want to catch up with our first 6 days, we've included a link to the BigUn Part 1 in the video description below. So far we'd covered around 1100 miles and had travelled through 8 countries in Europe, plus our start locations of the Isle of Man and England respectively. The grand plan on day 7 was to set out from our hotel and put in a few motorway miles so that we could meet up with Steve in the car park area of the Scotchan Caves in northwest Slovenia. We set a target of 12ish, but we were expecting to settle in and have a leisurely lunch while we waited for Steve to sort out his hire bike, work out how to ride it, remember to ride on the right, and wrestle with the minuscule sat-nav I'd lent him. As things turned out, Steve completely surprised us by not only turning up on time, but by pitching up at the car park immediately behind us. This meant we had time to go and explore the caves, a World Heritage Site and a must-see on any tourist visit to Slovenia.
For some reason I don't know, I can't explain why, I presume this would be some sort of choo-choo train that would take you around the caves. No effort, ice creams at the end, maybe a cream tea, all that kind of stuff. What a load of bollocks that was.
Yeah.
So we started the tour. We were then told, oh, by the way, if you need to go for a pee, too late. It's a 2-hour tour and we're going down 150 metres.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not normally claustrophobic to that degree,
no,
but I had a momentary sense of the willies, just going like, what happens if you fall ill?
Yeah, because you didn't really know what to expect, and it wasn't in the end very claustrophobic because it was they were very large caves.
Very, very big and wide, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The journey down into the caves took a little longer than we'd planned, so we set out for our overnight stay in Labin further down the coast, as soon as we could. A planned visit to Pula to take in the Roman amphitheatre on the way had to be organised on the fly, and we didn't have much time to stop and stare. This wasn't too much of a problem, as when we turned up the amphitheatre was all but closed, and the parking around it was crushed. So Steve and I left Mike guarding the bikes, and we rushed over to take a few hasty snaps. The village of Labin was a complete delight. The host of our B&B phoned ahead to reserve us a table at the Café Velo, which I assumed would provide us with some fairly basic grub. How wrong I was, as the Velo turned out to be a posh Italian restaurant for which we were significantly underdressed. Great food though, even if Steve upset the waiter a little by ordering a light red with the fish. Beating a hasty retreat from the village of Labin to avoid the wine police, day 8 of our grand adventure saw the 3 of us headed down the coast to Zadar, our southernmost point in Croatia. The coast road is reputed to be a beautiful ride, and it was, but with some reservations.
The next day was the trip down the Dalmatian or Istrian coast.
Yes.
To Zadar,
Yeah.
So some of it was a bit disappointing, I thought, because there were just lots of roadworks and you were kept away from the sea.
Yeah.
But then suddenly you were along the sea,
And
and the views were fantastic.
And the roads were very good. There were the long sweeping curves along the coast road there, with the occasional sharp bend, but nothing like what we were experiencing up in the mountains.
And of course the occasional homicidal road crew.
The road crew incident was a bit of a wake-up call and a reminder that, as a biker, you should always expect the unexpected, especially when it's a gang of blasé road workers who regard warning signs as a nicety and who lurk around blind bends just to see what'll happen. We halted briefly to make sure that Steve, who was bringing up the rear, had cleared the blockage, and then continued on our way, but I noticed afterwards that we all treated blind corners a bit more carefully. Some of the roads in this region of Croatia seemed a little trigger happy when it came to speed limits, changing them sometimes every 50 yards. They varied from around 90 kph on the open road to as little as 30 kph, which translates to just 18 miles an hour. And that's unnaturally slow. Before we reached the fun stuff, we found ourselves on a stretch of dual carriageway which was of course mostly straight, but even then the views were stunning. And once we'd reached the main coast road, we all just chilled out and enjoyed the sunshine, and of course the views. Here's a couple of minutes dedicated to capturing the essence of our ride down the Croatian coast. Arriving at Zadar, we headed for the harbour area to check out the setting sun and the famous sea organ. And yes, that noise is the sea organ in full song. It's a giant musical instrument played by air being pushed through low-pitched whistles by the action of the waves. Steve, with his technical pilot brain, had to get in close of course to see what it was all about.
I was rather amazed to see the crowd watch the sun go over the horizon and then applaud it.
Yeah.
When that doesn't happen every day. But that's okay.
Once the sun had set, another tourist attraction revealed itself. Called the Sun Salutation, it's a series of luminescing circles which react to the sound of the sea organ, and which of course light up the areas of the harbour side. After a trip into town for our evening grub, we returned to the harbour for a while to watch the circles and take in a last peaceful view of the sea before setting off on our visit to a secret airbase in the morning. Day 9 of our grand adventure saw us leaving the Croatian coast at Zadar and heading inland to the capital city of Zagreb, with a stop off en route to the Ljubljana airbase, a military relic from the 70s. And yes, it does seem that everywhere on our route begins with a Z, something that had led to a bit of confusion and even a little detour on the previous evening. I won't reveal who was leading at the time, suffice it to say that there were 3 of us. I was at the back and Steve was just in front of me. For the run into Zagreb, we'd chosen roads that were efficient as opposed to the slower and more scenic tourist routes that led through Croatia's national parkland. This was one of our more difficult choices, but on a tour designed to cover a lot of ground, you can't stop everywhere, and I knew we'd be riding through some truly dramatic scenery later in the week. And so we duly arrived at Ljubljana, a military facility which was previously highly secret, although active for just 20 years. Being built into the base of a mountain, it provided hidden hangars for aircraft and boasted 5 runways which allowed for rapid deployment with minimal risk of interference. Before setting out for the tour, I checked out the area using Google Street View, and so we headed for the location of an abandoned Douglas Dakota, which marks the outer perimeter of the airbase. When I checked, the Dakota stood alone, but when we 3 musketeers pitched up, we found a welcoming cafe right next to the aircraft. Free enterprise at work. After letting Steve revert to his default captain role for a while in the Dakota, we set off to the hangars and were really surprised to be greeted by a rush of cold air as we approached.
So we went to find where the jets would come out of the secret airbase.
Yep.
And the amazing thing there was it was really hot. And as we drove to the entrance or the exit of one of those caves, the temperature plummeted.
On the bike, 30 to 40 yards out of the entrance.
Yeah.
You were just chilled.
Yeah.
Oh, that was amazing.
The airbase as a whole is open to the public, but with a stern warning not to stray from the runways, as the surrounding countryside is still carpeted with landmines. Oh, and it's only a few hundred metres from the border with Bosnia-Herzegovina, and wandering too close will attract the attention of the police. It's enough to keep you on your toes.
Officially, I did cross the border because my phone latched on to the Herzegovinian local cell, and I sent a text. It was actually a text from the Dakota, and with a picture, and it cost me £7.50.
And then, for no apparent reason, we decided to form an impromptu formation team and ride along the runway a little. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. White helmets? Watch and learn. After a quick run on Croatian A roads, we were in the city of Zagreb. Our lodging for the night, the Sundial Boutique Hotel, was a bit of a surprise. A nice one. I'd booked it at short notice and hadn't expected too much based on their online description. But it turned out to be a fantastic hotel. Comfortable, friendly, affordable, and with great food and drink on offer. The following morning, we checked out of our rooms, but we were allowed to leave our bikes in the car park while we explored the city. In addition, the reception staff stored all of our biking gear for us, which lightened our load considerably and led to our being able to explore the city in comfort. Our first port of call on our tourist day in Zagreb was to a rather enigmatic museum, the Museum of Broken Relationships. Its displays are dedicated to the material remains of relationships that have ended, whatever the reason. Sometimes funny, often rather sad, the exhibits are certainly thought-provoking, and it was great to do something other than pound the roads after 10 days of solid riding. It had to be said that this museum wasn't universally appreciated by all of the group.
That was quite thought-provoking, you know, the irony of some and the detritus after a relationship breakup is quite remarkable.
Right, yeah.
I know it wasn't your cup of tea. I could tell that by the way you were consulting your phone halfway through.
Well,
Steve and I read some stuff.
I read some stuff as well, and I just thought, okay. So you met somebody, you fell out, your relationship didn't last, and this is a piece of memorabilia, which means a lot to you as the person who's left it in the museum.
Yeah.
And I can see that if you were perhaps, I don't know, maybe going through a breakup of a relationship and you went there, you might be able to sort of empathise with what was there. Yeah, it didn't really strike a big chord with me, but.
And so we found ourselves killing a little time downtown, getting in some essential shopping. Steve was drawn to a shop selling stuff that we couldn't get at home, but I had a more pressing need. After 10 days of wearing earplugs all day, and sometimes at night to keep Mike's snoring at bay, I had an urgent need for some earplug lubricant. This is quite a specialised product which I normally order online before a tour, but this time around I simply forgot. After some difficulty trying to describe what I needed to a succession of beauticians and pharmacists, we struck gold, of a sort. It didn't fit my description exactly, but it did the job perfectly. As noon approached, we made our way up the hill from the town centre via a funicular railway to the Lotrak Tower, home of the Grits Cannon, which after a year's absence returned recently to duty, namely sounding a daily salute. To be honest, I wasn't prepared for the cannon being quite so loud, hence the shaky footage. We then took a fairly lengthy walk out of the town centre, finding ourselves at the Nikola Tesla Technical Museum. In contrast to the Auto Museum at Marksall that we visited in our first week of the tour, the Tesla displays were extremely well organised and immaculately presented. However, I was expecting some interactive exhibits, possibly including dramatic lightning bolts of static electricity, and there were none. In fact, on entering, we were told that the museum had a strict no-touching policy for all of the exhibits. Still, a very interesting walk around, prompting a number of technical discussions amongst the three of us petrolheads. After a few motorway miles, which I didn't bother to record, we ended up at our next overnight location, Ljubljana, a little north of Zagreb. We were on a tight 6-day schedule for this part of the tour, but if I have a regret, it's that we couldn't stay longer in this exciting and vibrant city. Our taxi driver for the evening took us to the centre of the town, right by the famous Dragon Bridge. He recommended a restaurant to us, and it was a winner. The Sokol restaurant represented traditional Slovenian fare. We sampled the restaurant's homebrewed beer, and then a variety of Slovenian dishes, which we ordered from pictures on the menu. Founded in 1850, the restaurant has become a tourist attraction in its own right, and is a great place to get a feeling for the real Slovenian culture. We stayed quite late, enjoying the atmosphere and a few beers.
So we got back to the hotel, the Azurums again, in Ljubljana. Had ourselves a lovely sort of brekkie, whatever, the next morning.
Found a pat of butter that had gone off. The lady that owned the rooms had noticed that we'd left a pat of butter or a pack of butter on the table that was obviously not right, and immediately went into fits of apoplexy, trying to explain that it was a complete mistake. Absolutely frightened to death that we were going to put a bad review on TripAdvisor.
Yeah, I thought she was going to get us to sign a disclaimer to say that we wouldn't leave a bad review about the bloody butter that nobody ate other than you. Before we were released from Ljubljana.
Yeah.
But other than that, a really lovely lady, and actually a nice place to stay.
Day 11 saw us leaving the big cities behind and heading for the hills, the Julian Alps in fact. Unsurprisingly, the villages had a rather Austrian feel to them, as we travelled very close to both the Austrian and Italian borders as the day progressed. It felt great to get off the motorways and onto roads that were relaxing and which offered breathtaking views of the surrounding countryside. They were almost traffic free, unless of course you count the odd tractor and some cyclists. Around mid-morning, we stopped off at a scenic viewpoint that featured a prominent monument, and which told a story of a very different time. At the time, the monument seemed perhaps just another sight to take in along our route, but afterwards I found myself revisiting the experience. An uneasy tale of the futility of war set against the most peaceful of backdrops. As if to add further contrast, our next stop was at the truly beautiful Lake Bled, a scenic destination that transcends its touristy feel and is well worth battling through queues on the roads to get to. Once we parked up our bikes, we took a Pletner hire boat to Bled Island. Only human and electric powered boats are allowed on the lake. The island boasts a church with a tower that stands at 170 feet and which is accessed by a significant number of steps. The church is often used for local weddings. Traditionally, it's considered good luck for the groom to carry his bride up the steps on the day of their wedding before ringing the church bell and making a wish. It might of course just be a clever way for the local chiropractors to drum up some extra business. There's not a huge amount to see on the island, but it's beautiful in its own right, so we simply took our time to walk around and take in the sights. Following a relaxed ride back, we had lunch at the Lakeside Cafe, then set out for one of our most interesting and challenging roads, the Vrsic Pass. En route, we stopped for a coffee at Kranjska Gora, yet another idyllic spot in northern Slovenia, and yet another reason to make a return trip to the area. As we stopped for coffee, Steve realised that his wallet was missing. He'd dropped it somewhere in Lake Bled. We considered going back to find it, but decided against, as Steve said there wasn't much cash in it.
Thanks very much for this, Steve.
To add to the pressure, the day was getting on and we still had a mountain to climb. The Vrsic Pass is the highest in Slovenia and was transformed from a logging trail during the First World War. I'm not sure when the straights were tarmacked, but the standout feature is definitely the seemingly endless supply of cobbled hairpins, which caused some consternation in the ranks. Not to mention a challenge to my suspension. Steve and I, armed as we were with our adventure-style bikes, made short work of the cobbles, but Mike didn't find life quite so easy on his big sports tourer, which is much heavier and has rather less forgiving suspension.
Trial riding sprung to mind as far as I was. Tried to trial ride on a GTR 1400.
Being connected to Mike by an intercom system, I found myself being treated to his running commentary on the corners, and it wasn't polite. I guess I should have been more sympathetic, but that's not really my strong point. We did wait for him at the top though.
Give Michael a moment to assemble his thoughts.
Yeah. Well, that would have been fun in the wet, wouldn't it?
Interestingly, the ride down the western side of the pass was much less fraught with the dreaded cobbles, although Steve did have a little moment of his own. He discovered the perils of damp cobbles as he entered a blind tunnel.
And then there was one moment when we entered a tunnel at the end, only to find it was cobbled in the tunnel.
Yes.
Not a tension getter when
Yes.
you find yourself on wet cobble.
I guess the phrase attention getter is typical of Steve's understated approach to challenging moments. The remainder of the ride down the mountain was simply glorious and deserves a little musical accompaniment. Our stop for the night was at a hamlet in the mountains, Log Pod Mangatum, where we stayed at a hotel called Joe's Place. Confusingly, our host wasn't called Joe at all, but Ronaldo. There was only one place to eat in the whole village, but luckily the grub was excellent. Oh, and they had pub games to keep our Steve out of trouble. Day 12, the last in our mini tour of Slovenia and Croatia, saw us first head north for a bit to take in the dramatic scenery afforded by the Mangat Saddle near the Italian and Austrian borders, before putting in some miles southward to finish up just outside of Venice. The saddle offers a fantastic panorama as it rises to just short of 7,000 feet above sea level. The road itself leads nowhere other than up, so once you're done you have to come down again. Oh, and you have to pay a toll charge for the privilege. That said, it's not particularly expensive, and the views are truly of bucket list quality. We stopped partway up our ascent of the saddle, and I took a moment to include a shout out to one of our friends who suffers from vertigo and who really isn't keen on mountain views. Yup, we're rather mean that way.
Hey, lovely. And yes, Andy White, this is for you.
What the fuck did we do that for? What?
An almost infinite ability to fall down the gap. Don't look down.
A couple of those corners in first gear. I know.
The road does get a little congested at times, and is used by tourists of all types, but the vehicles generally give each other some room, and we progress quite quickly to the top. The way down was in some ways even better than the upward journey, as the panoramic views opened up below us. Continuing downward as the morning progressed, the road got a bit busier, and whilst most vehicles coming up kept to their side, a notable few didn't. My helmet-mounted GoPro doesn't really do justice to the amazing views, but a quick look at my sat-nav screen should tell you all you need to know about the twisty nature of the saddle road. I was perhaps enjoying the view a little too much though, as I got caught out momentarily by the appearance of a homicidal Volvo driver who had incautiously overtaken a cyclist just before entering a blind hairpin bend, and it was squarely in the middle of the road as a result. I've blanked out parts of my running commentary to spare the blushes of our viewers. Still, no harm, no foul, and we continued on our merry way. Despite the somewhat crowded roads and a distinct lack of protective barriers, the Mangat saddle was a definite hit with the team. Did I mention cars taking up too much room? It was a fitting high point to mark the end of Steve's time with Mike and I, and a clearly delighted Steve has already signed up for our next adventure trip. Once we'd completed our run up the Mangat saddle, we found our way to the police station in Bled, where Steve tried to report his missing wallet. We weren't expecting an investigation in return, but an incident number was needed for insurance.
I did the talking, he did the listening, and said, "What do you want me to do about it?" And I said, "I'd like you to record it in case I have to make an insurance claim or something." And
No dice there then. After making the right noises, it was obvious that the police weren't actually going to do anything, so we chalked it down to experience and soldiered on. And so on to one of the best roads in Slovenia, and one of the most disappointing moments of the tour. If you don't like flashing images, look away now. My GoPro decided, and not for the first time, to switch to frozen image mode. The video collapsed, leaving us with just an audio track. Very frustrating. You'll have to take my word for the quality of the route. The SR646 was one of the best roads I've ridden in Europe. I guess I'll have to go back with a more reliable camera on my next tour in the area. In the event, that wouldn't be the greatest of hardships. The rest of the day was spent on the motorway, so as we play some outgoing credits, here are some of the highlights of our run around Slovenia and Croatia. Join us in part 3 of the BigUn, where Mike and I make our way westwards via some great roads to Carcassonne and then into Spain for the Pyrenees and the Picos to round off the tour.